Good evening. I'm Woody Keon, President and Chief Operating Officer of the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, located in Cincinnati, Ohio. On behalf of our board, staff, and volunteers, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's program. Last June, we introduced a monthly virtual programming series called Unmasking the Realities, Voices of Social Justice. The purpose of these programs is to provide our audiences with unique insights, straight talk, and opportunities to learn and be inspired from meaningful dialogue aimed at uncovering and eliminating systemic social injustices. Tonight, we're very proud to offer you another very timely program, Unpacking Voter Suppression, a virtual discussion featuring our special guest, Gloria Steinem. Before we get started, I would like to give a quick shout out to our members and to all of you who have supported us, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic. It's because of support from you that we have been able to provide our wonderful programming initiatives, such as the discussions you're about to see tonight. If you would like to donate to help us continue to fulfill our mission of fighting for a more equitable and inclusive tomorrow, please visit our website, freedomcenter.org, and donate to our COVID-19 Relief Fund. Thank you for your support and for being with us this evening. I hope you enjoy the program. At this time, I'd like to introduce to you our Director of Museum Experiences, Katie Brummel. Katie?
Thank you, Woody, and good evening, everybody. At this time, I want to take a moment and introduce you to tonight's moderator, Malcom Johnson. Malcom is an award-winning producer at FOX19 Now. While he is not a Cincinnati native, he's spent the last 2 years making powerful connections across the city. He understands that the only way to properly tell stories of any city, any neighborhood, and any community is by knowing the people that live there and earning their trust. Malcom was born in New York, raised in Atlanta, and attended the illustrious historically Black college, Alabama Agricultural and Mechanical University. While in school, he played football, charted his college chapter of the National Association of Black Journalists, and pledged Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, all while working at his first news station, WAFF 48. His latest work, a documentary called Bigger Than a Moment, documenting the outcry of our city, will debut tomorrow, Friday, October 23rd. It's an honor to have you guys here tonight, and Malcom, it's over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for having me. And thank you for giving me the chance to introduce this woman, our speaker tonight, Miss Gloria Steinem. She has experienced many accomplishments throughout her decades of service to the country, to the world. She's a co-founder of Ms. Magazine, and she helped found the New York Magazine, where she was a political columnist and wrote feature articles. As a freelance writer, she was published in Esquire, New York Times Magazine, and women's magazines, as well as other publications across the country and around the world. She's worked with documentaries. Again, she's been in just about every major publication. I watched the movie about her just last night, The Glorias, and it was engaging and enlightening and entertaining. And I said I wasn't going to say it, but, I'm going to have to say it. The truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off. Thank you so much for joining us, Miss Gloria Steinem.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And, I think that this is exactly the right moment for this discussion, because nothing on earth could be more important than voting. And
Right.
Never has it been more true than it is going to be in just a few days.
Right. And that is totally true. But just before we get to that, how are you doing mentally? We're all dealing with the pandemic right now, but how are you? I'm sure it's just as stressful on you as it is, the rest of the country, the rest of the world now.
Well, I think it's not maybe as stressful on me because, for one thing, writers are used to self-isolating. Also, I am currently, although I spent the first 3 months locked in my apartment in New York, I had the chance to come here and be on a ranch in California near Santa Barbara. So I'm, I can see horses and cows out the window. I can walk around on grass, and I'm I'm very, very, very lucky. So I think this period of time, though, is really been consciousness changing for all of us, and we probably will only fully understand it with time.
Right. So this period of time you mentioned consciousness changing. What would you say is the current state of the United States of America as a whole?
Just a little question like that. Yes. Well, I think that we are being forced to realize that because we have a president who is essentially unelected, I mean, he was not elected by the popular vote. He lost
Right.
the popular vote. So in many ways, he, to me anyway, speaking personally, represents the approximately third of the country that that doesn't accept the changes that have been made in the majority consciousness by the great social justice movements, by the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay and lesbian and transgender movement. You know, if we look at the public opinion polls, they have changed the majority opinion, but there seems to be about a third of the country that is in full out revolt
Right.
against those. And we have a president who represents the backlash rather than the majority. So in a sense, you know, I'm just speaking for myself, but I think what I'm learning is to admit what is still a lot of backlash in the country, because we're seeing at a high level in the White House.
Right. And I've noticed that I hear on, you know, as many news channels that the administration has emboldened certain ways of thinking, not necessarily conducive to progress and, you know, forward thinking for the nation as a whole. You said that this is a consciousness changing time. You have been on the front lines of forward thinking of feminism in our country for decades. So what other time periods would you say is similar to the one we're in now?
In the past?
Yes, in the past, as far as consciousness shifting.
Well, I think perhaps Reconstruction, because that was a time after the Civil War and after slavery had been uprooted, but it was a time of both resistance and transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And that may be a period of time we can learn from. I mean, some terrible truths, you know, like lynching did not happen during slavery. It happened after slavery was over and during that period of time. So that's an extreme example, but I do think that there is a resistance to the majority change now that bears some resemblance to that period of time.
Would you say that the majority change is coming for America?
I think, you know, if you look at the public opinion polls, it's already happened in a consciousness sense. You know, most people don't believe that our lives should be dictated by the amount of melanin in our skin or by our gender or by our class. And I think in a way, the pandemic has increased that consciousness, because COVID does not recognize race or gender or nationality.
Right.
And so it has underlined our common humanity and our lack of division. But at the same time, there is a resistance and a backlash. So, you know, it isn't as if we know what the future is going to be yet. But I guess, I'm not a historian, but perhaps we most resemble that time of Reconstruction that happened after the Civil War.
Aside from, you know, voting for one party, one presidential candidate, or the other, what would you say is on the ballot this year, this coming election in 2020?
Well, it depends where we are, because there are all kinds of local initiatives, but we should understand the importance of down ballot,
Hmm.
because part of the problem we are now in is that we have frequently behaved as if Washington was more important than our state elections. And because we have neglected attention often to our state legislatures, they have tended to be less representative of the majority view than Washington even, and more likely to, I'm generalizing too much, but more likely to be able to be controlled by special interests, by, for instance, people who make money from building prisons, by what has been named the prison industrial complex.
Right.
I think we've learned a lesson. I hope we've learned a lesson, which is that we need to pay just as much attention to the affairs of our state legislature as we do to Washington.
I'm not going to specifically ask a question about down balloting, but I brought this up to you. My cousin's name is Emily. She's a freshman at Emory, just outside of Atlanta. And she has been trying to convince me that her vote does not matter. And I'm trying to tell her, it's your civic duty to participate in the election. I'm trying to tell her the importance of it, but if you go down rabbit holes on YouTube or if you scroll too much on Twitter, then you'll have, large amounts of people trying to convince you that there's no hope because of the Electoral College and whatnot. So what do I say to my cousin who I believe is incredibly misinformed?
Well, I do this with some humility because I don't know your cousin, but I would say in a very basic way, if we don't vote, we don't exist. I mean, it's the one way we have to speak in this country. And it's true that, it's imperfect in the sense that, a federal vote is, we still have state votes and local votes and so on. But the voting booth, I would say, is the single most important place that we can express our opinion. And if we don't do that, we've given up before we even begin. So, it's not hard to go vote. It's a pretty easy thing to do. It's probably easier than going dancing these days.
Yeah,
so,
I'd agree.
Right. And also if you consider that people have died for the right to vote, literally.
Yes.
And pretty recently, well into the 60s. So, I just think that there is an effort to invade our brains with a restriction on voting that used to be a literacy test or racial barrier or gender barrier. Then now there is a kind of online effort to do the same thing psychologically. So we should be aware of that and rebel against that and say, no, I'm going to be a revolutionary here. Hello, I'm going to vote.
We're speaking on the importance of voting, and voter suppression is something that comes up all the time. I read an NBC News article just a couple days ago where it said that people of color usually spend, I think, a 71% longer, was 71% more time waiting in line to vote than white people. So when it comes to voter suppression, what are some dog whistles of voter suppression? What are some of the things that we need to look out for?
Simple things like where are the voting places? There's been an effort to move them away from campuses because the conservative or right-wing forces don't want young people and students to vote, or to move them obviously away from Black neighborhoods, to make it easier to vote in white neighborhoods or the places that the right wing or conservatives want to vote more. I mean, it's just pretty obvious. So, I would say we need to help our neighbors vote. We need to sit with our neighbors' kids. We need to drive our neighbors to the polls if we can. We need to say it's safe to vote. It is safe to vote as long as we're 6 feet apart.
Right.
We should take picnic lunches. We should blast music on our whatever, blast forms we have.
Right.
Right. We should meet each other in line. We can make friends for life in line. We should
Right.
turn it into the positive democratic event that it truly is. First, if we don't vote, we don't exist.
Right.
And second, we can make it in its very experience a glorious experience of democracy and meet people that we would never otherwise have met.
In your book, My Life on the Road, you mentioned you were speaking to a crowd of around 700 people at Palm Beach County Community College in Florida. At that event, you found out that of those 700 people, at least 100 had either been unable to vote for their chosen candidate or to vote at all. Could you take us back to that moment and tell us how you felt and tell us what you realized in that moment?
Yeah, that was truly remarkable because, for one thing, it was a mostly white group, and it was a mostly middle-class group. So it wasn't a group that was being suppressed in obvious ways, but nonetheless, Florida being, in my experience, one of the more difficult and less democratic places in terms of the distribution of the ability to vote. Nonetheless, that was the case. And I've always regretted, because one person in the audience said, stay with us and we'll demonstrate in March tomorrow. And I couldn't be, for reasons, that I had to be home. And to this day, I regret that I didn't stay in March with them. So, follow our instincts. March, stay.
So the 2020 election, the only thing I can compare it to is the 2016 election. And of course, you've seen more elections than I have. But what do you think sets this election apart as far as, the overall political climate or the high stakes of the election?
Well, when you say that to me, the first thing that comes to mind is that it's the first time in my life that there has been someone in the White House trying to suppress the vote. That has not happened before. Because he is an accidental president. He was not elected by the popular vote. He knows the more people vote, the less he's likely to win. And so we have at a high level someone who is trying to suppress the vote. That is very dangerous on the one hand. On the other hand, we can learn from it because he is teaching us at that high level.
But do you believe he's taking us backwards as far as voting rights go?
He's doing his best to take us backward, yes, right. And we are fighting to keep where we are and move forward.
So I, like a lot of people, am a bit overwhelmed with politics in general. And it's not just the presidential election, but local elections. Every time my TV is on and I see another campaign ad, I want to take my shoe off and throw my shoe at the television because I'm frustrated. How do we remain hopeful in the current political climate?
Well, I think we need to talk to each other and not just look at the television screen, which manipulates us. So if we turn to our neighbors and say, you know, as much as we can these days, which is electronically turn to our neighbors, right? And look at local issues, then we can thread our way out. You know, politics is like a tree. And if we start at the top, it's very difficult, but a tree has roots. And if we start where the roots are, which is our neighborhood, our neighbors, what our local issues are, you know, and work our way up, then we can have an authenticity and a knowledge that we need. And also, I would say it's important to trust your instinct. You know, we're provided with a very sensitive thing called instinct. And I think we kind of know who's a threat to us, who supports us, who makes us feel empowered, who makes us feel hopeless and disempowered, and trust that instinct.
This year, we celebrated the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote. However, we know that the 19th Amendment did not grant all women the right to vote. For example, women of color. How can we highlight and honor that monumental step, the 19th Amendment, in history, while also meeting the moment of the current social justice movement?
Well, I mean, I think that you've already done the important thing by pointing out that not every woman won the right to vote in 1920, that actually not every woman could vote until 1965.
Right.
That Native American women, Asian American women, African American women, most African American women, except those in the North, you know, could not vote until the literacy tests and all the barriers that, you know, were racial barriers were removed in the South. So that in itself is an education, not to mention the very fact that women as a group were forbidden to vote. I mean, we should remember that before Europeans showed up in this country, there was no, I mean, the Native American languages didn't even have words for gender or for race. You know, the idea of the form of human organization was the circle, not a hierarchy. So if that existed for most of human history on this land, we can continue it. It kind of, I don't know if this is helpful to anyone else, but it's helpful to me to stand on the land wherever I am in this country and realize that there was a democracy here before Europeans showed up. So it's in the land, if I think of vertical history.
So just digging into your past a little bit, your decades-long fight, what are some of the protections and policies that you've been fighting for all these years?
Well, you know, for women, whatever our race or wherever we live, we have a kind of extra set of restrictions because we happen to have wombs. We happen to have the one thing that you don't have, right?
Right.
And that's pretty crucial. So patriarchy, by definition, has tried to control women's bodies and decide, you know, whether or not they could have children, how many children, and especially with racism added to, you know, multiply the motive for controlling women's bodies. I'll give you an example. Years ago, I went to interview Fannie Lou Hamer because there was an important case that Ruth Ginsburg actually was fighting in the Supreme Court to protect the rights of two young women who were being threatened with sterilization in order to maintain their support on welfare, you know, a ridiculous case. So she sent me to interview Fannie Lou Hamer because she knew that Fannie Lou had been sterilized against her will, without her knowledge, when she went into a Mississippi hospital for something else. um, that I think that begins to tell us how political it is that women's bodies are the means of reproduction. For instance, at the very same time that Fannie Lou was being sterilized without her knowledge when she went into the hospital for something else, a white woman in her state had to have 2 or 3 children and her husband's written permission to be sterilized. I mean, what could be more profoundly racist than that? So I say this because of reproduction, women are kind of the early warning system, I would say, of authoritarianism. The efforts to control women's lives may be felt even before they're felt in some other ways by the whole population.
So, and for that, I'm even more grateful as a man to be having this conversation with you. So, looking ahead
I would
to,
say, I don't mean to say that men are exempt from this, because, for instance, one of the earliest cases we fought was a California case in which a Chicano man who had been in prison, I believe, was told that he had to be sterilized as a condition of his parole. So it happens to men too. It's just that it happens to women more.
that's something I'm definitely going to be looking into as soon as we're done here.
I hope and believe it's not happening now, but it's important to be alert.
Yes, and learning from history as always. So, you mentioned reproductive rights. So I have to ask, in the next 2 weeks, the Congress could be voting to add Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court. What are your general thoughts on the process by which she's being, pushed through, and what she could mean for the country as a whole moving forward?
She has absolutely nothing in common with Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
Right.
who stood so clearly for reproductive rights and for racial justice. It's she's an intelligent woman who has the right to choose to live as she wishes to live as an individual, but she does not have the right to dictate to us that women's bodies can be controlled by the state. From the opinions that she has written, though she was quite cagey, I would say, in her answering of questions in public, but from the petitions she has signed and her opinions of the past, it seems that she believes that a woman's body can be controlled by the state, reproductively speaking. And that is just not acceptable.
So, do you believe that if she is, brought through and added to the Supreme Court, then a woman's right to choose, where do you think that stands? Do you think, you know, so I've heard that, that the Supreme Court would pass it down to the states and allow each state to make the individual decision?
Yes, well, that's quite possible. And what that means is that we've been in that position a little bit in the past. So women in states where their reproductive rights are restricted then have to travel hundreds of miles to another state. And we have raised money for trips and caravans and women staying in each other's houses and other, it's possible, but it is a huge restriction and hardship on women's rights. mean, the right to decide when and whether to have children should be up to the individual and should be just as protected as freedom of speech. I have to say, if it gets really bad, as it has been in the past, because I'm an old person, so I remember when it was really bad, right? The kind of last-ditch defense is, we didn't obey the law then, and we won't obey the law now. It will just create disrespect for the Supreme Court in the end.
So I want to ask, because I was watching the Glorias last night and doing a lot of reading. And of course, when it comes to any movement, even if there is, one streamlined idea, there are other, ideas within that one goal that provide a lot of nuance. And there are certainly a lot of disagreements on how to get to that one place. What role does that nuance, that difference of opinion play when it comes to a movement?
That's glorious. The difference of opinion is great,
Mm-hmm.
because it helps you to see the different paths to the same goal. And the important thing is that we listen to each other. I mean, I would say that the most instant form of democracy is if those of us in a group who may have a little bit more power than others remember to listen as much as we talk. And those of us who have less power in some way remember to talk as much as we listen, which can be just as difficult, perhaps, because we're a little bit used to hiding, right?
Right.
If there's a kind of instant democracy that comes from that. And if we do simple things like sitting in a circle instead of in rows. I've noticed when I go into classrooms, because I wander around the country speaking, and if you just go into a classroom and move the chairs from rows into a circle, so everybody is facing each other, it changes the nature of the discussion. So, it's not rocket science here, it's kind of basic things of listening as much as we talk, talking as much as sitting in circles, using a talking stick as in Native American tradition to pass around the circle. So the person who's holding it has a chance to talk and everybody else has to listen, and then they have to pass it on. I mean, just organic democratic practices really make a difference.
When we're talking about a woman's right to choose, which could be in jeopardy soon, there's a desire to strengthen the Voting Rights Act. What would you say, and should our immediate action be when it comes to getting more people to the voting booth? How do we get more people to want to go and exercise that right so that we can protect the rights that people have already fought and died for?
Mm-hmm. Well, the discussion we're having, I hope, is helpful, but different people will do this in different ways. Some people have neighbors who don't have cars and may find it difficult to get there. Others know that there are going to be long lines for hours and can take food and folding chairs and, music, blast boxes, a little
Right.
dancing in line never hurt, can, it depends on our neighborhood and communal situations where we're voting. But I think, one, we are determined to vote because it is the only way we exist in this country. And two, we can prepare for it by discovering what the difficulties may be and trying to help each other compensate for them and to make it fun and communal. It can be a positive experience.
So once the voting is done, assuming that we vote and then whatever candidates at whatever levels we get the result that we want on election day, then what? Where do we go from there?
Well, that will be, a huge struggle because we've been dictated to for 4 years by somebody who is not at the top of the public opinion polls at all. So when Biden and Kamala Harris are present, it will help a lot. But I do think that we need to pay attention to our counties, to our state legislatures, because that has been those have been the weak points in the process of democracy. We have tended to pay more attention to Washington than we have to our counties or to our state legislatures.
Well, and thank you. We can actually take questions now if you guys are ready for that.
Okay, but I would like answers too. We could use answers, right? So maybe
Right.
we should invite answers too, as well as questions.
Well, why don't we just go ahead and start with this. So when you consider other moments that you've lived through, do you have more hope or more frustration at this point in time?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I would say both. I mean, I have never in my life seen at a high level such incompetence, greed, and lack of respect for the majority opinion in this country. It's very hard to see that in the White House. That's a first. I mean, I've seen some difficult presidents, but I've never seen this degree of incompetence from somebody who was not elected by the popular vote. So that's discouraging. But as I was saying before, I think we can learn from it. We can learn the imperfections of the system, of the Electoral College, and we can learn, that even though the majority public opinion polls are heartening in terms of a belief in equal opportunity in all ways, there is still apparently about a third of the country in Trump hats that that are somewhere else, and they have a right to be. We have to protect their rights, but they are not the majority.
What, besides actually voting, do you feel are the most important things we can do to make a difference between now and Election Day?
Well, we need to look at our local, our school boards, our counties, our states, which have been way more neglected usually than because we've been paying attention to Washington and not elsewhere, because our television screens have been totally occupied by Trump and not by what's going on in our state legislatures. So if we have book clubs, some of us, we can have voting clubs and, meet once a month and figure out what the issues are and who the people are in our counties, in our school boards, in our state legislatures. And it's fun. This is not a terrible task. And also, I hope that people will consider running for office. It's fascinating, it's possible, it's exhilarating, and we need more candidates.
I'm going to jump in here and ask this one, and I'm a bit biased in asking, but what advice do you have for an aspiring journalist and social justice advocate?
Well, no, I in the course of introducing, I was thinking that this is what we had in common. And
I mean, I got a ton of questions just for me, but I can't do this just for me.
it's I find it a great gift to be a journalist because it's like being paid to learn.
Right. And ask questions.
And ask questions, right. And, we have an obligation to make the facts as accurate as we possibly can. And if we state our opinions, to say, this is my opinion, so people can see the difference. But I do think that we can be helpful by stating our opinions if we mark them so it's clearly an opinion, because we are kind of surrogates for the reader. We're standing in the place of, it's like Winston Churchill. He started out as a journalist, actually, and he wrote brilliant columns from Africa because he managed to put the reader in the place where he was. And if we look at it that way, that we are literally a surrogate for the reader, then I think it increases our sense of responsibility and also excitement.
Do you feel we are backtracking in rights in America right now?
Well, it depends who the we is. I mean, there are certainly forces that are trying to put us back in a box that is dictated by race and class and geography and where we live and gender. But the majority of us, I think, are trying to get out of that box. But it's complicated, and we need to understand how complicated it is. For instance, here's a random example. We can ask our banks where we deposit our money how many mortgages they write in areas that are quote unquote minority neighborhoods. Because part of the problem is that banks have discriminated against and not offered mortgages at all in neighborhoods that are not white neighborhoods. Then they have all kinds of rationale for this, but there it is.
Right. Cincinnati, like much of the country, has a very rich history of redlining.
Of redlining, thank you. That's exactly the right word that I was searching for. Thank you. And that's interesting. So do you want to talk about that? Because you know where the bodies are buried locally.
No, I would not want to misspeak in this. I would not want to misspeak, but I do know. But it's more than redlining. In the documentary I'm working on now, I wanted to look at it from like a past, present, and future perspective of race relations in the city. And I was given an hour. They say you can make an hour documentary. So then when I'm throwing stuff at the wall, I'm like, I want to go redlining. I want to go to the history of major highways in the city that were ripped through Black neighborhoods. But you can't put all that into 1 hour. So then you say, I'll start at 2001 with Timothy Thomas and work my way up. But yes, it's difficult to gain and to retain wealth when you were not given those opportunities to do that. And just redlining was just one of them. And I mean, redlining has a new face now, but property value in Black neighborhoods, it's a lot to overcome. But
well, I think I think that the white folks who are depositing their money in that bank can ask, how many mortgages have you written in an area that is traditionally Black, or so, if we're told the facts, and you have the facts, which is very, very valuable, I think there are people of goodwill who will put pressure on those banks and say, okay, I'm not depositing my money in your bank because you haven't written any mortgages in this area.
one that I feel is a pretty interesting question here. Somebody asked, do you fear a minority voice, which in this reference, they're referring to minority as essentially conservative women such as Amy Coney Barrett, will govern the future of America?
No, because they're a minority. So if we have a democracy, hello, I mean,
But wouldn't you say we're dealing with that right now?
well, we certainly want to protect her rights, but it's because we have an accidental president who lost by more than 3 million votes, popular votes, and, is wrongfully in the White House that we have this problem. And, we may continue to have this problem, but just, I'm not going to obey that law. I mean, we've most of my life, the Supreme Court has not been my friend. It's only, in the latter years of it. And I'm quite ready to return to a time in which the Supreme Court is not my friend, and I'm not going to obey those laws. I'm not saying we should do this, but I'm saying we may have to do this.
How do we go about reversing and amending gerrymandering that enabled our state legislature to be controlled by conservatives?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm so glad you said the magic word gerrymandering, because that is such a problem in so many states. And if you look at the way that electoral districts are,
It's disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, it's right. It does look like, I don't know, what is a gerrymander, an animal, but I mean, but it does look very peculiar. I mean, the basic long-term way is to run for state legislative office. Because we have paid more attention in a general way to Washington than to our state legislatures, they tend to be taken over by the interests they govern, or they legislate, I should say. So, I don't know, insurance has often been, more governed by state legislatures than by national law, for instance. So, or the building industry, which, ends up building prisons because they're a source of income in various ways, instead of schools and universities. I apologize for generalizing, because both of those things are very complicated and it depends where we are. But they're just examples of the importance of state legislative offices. If we just look at who's in our state legislature, does it look like the state?
Right.
Right.
From your decades-long career, from all of your experience, from what you've seen interacting in these various social justice causes over the years, what is one thing that you would like to leave our audience with to impart any words of wisdom or hope for, as Malcolm mentioned, a lot of us, I think, are experiencing this overwhelming feeling?
Do it. It's fun. I mean, I realize that we all need. I want us all to have enough money to have a nice place to live and food and dancing once in a while, but after that, money is boring, and just piling it up someplace in a bank is boring. And this kind of activism is fun. You meet people you never otherwise would have met. You have the joy of seeing conditions change for the better. You see, a homemaker or a carpenter, or, become a state legislator and really shake things up. For instance, look at the squad in Congress.
Right.
Those women are a pleasure to see. That's not the usual person you see in Washington. And there have been a lot of cases of that. So I would say, do it for the joy and fun and revolution and companionship.
How far away do you think we are from a female president?
Well, I do think we're still pretty far, because if you look at the resistance to Hillary Clinton, which was profound, and if you look at the resistance to Kamala Harris, even though she's in a vice presidential position, which is a little bit more acceptable, it's still profound. And I sit and try to figure out why. And I think some of it is because, in a deep way, we are mostly still raised by women when we're small. And so we associate female authority with childhood. I think this might be especially difficult for some men, because they feel unmanned by seeing a woman with authority over them, because the last time they saw that, they were 8. So I'm not saying all men by any means, but I think, I've noticed a few men. I remember during the Hillary Clinton campaign, there were, I used to count the number of men who crossed their legs when they were talking about Hillary Clinton. It was quite profound. So I think, I think there are deep reasons. So in some ways, in a big, deep way, we probably won't have a democracy at the top until we have democracies in families.
Mm.
Until
Oh, wow.
until men are raising children as much as women are, and women are as active outside the home as men are, and we truly have democratic families. And the same is true when we think about violence, because as long as the home is this most dangerous place for women, which it is, it's not the street. Women are more likely to be beaten up or killed by someone they know than by a stranger. So, this is, I don't mean this to be depressing, because I think it gives us a place to start. We create democratic families. We create families that are peaceful, in which their violence is not accepted or normalized. And then we are creating the roots of a larger democracy.
Has there ever been a time as a white woman when you regretted not using your platform to center someone else's voice?
Yes, I mean, there have been individual circumstances when I've thought, oh, I could have done this, I could have done that. Over time, I've just established kind of guidelines for myself. If there is a panel, say, and it doesn't look like the country, then I suggest that it could look like the country and try to help that happen, and just say, I'm not going to show up until it does. I can use myself to help in a positive way, not in a friendly way, to create groups of people who do look like the country, which is the whole point.
I think this one's interesting. Why have other countries successfully voted women into presidential positions?
Yeah, that is interesting, isn't it? Because there's so many countries that have been able to do that, and we have not. I can't answer it completely, except that I think that we combine the problems of both patriarchy and racism. And a lot of those countries that elected a woman were essentially one race countries, even though, of course, there are class differences. everywhere. So that may make some of the difference.
Do you believe we will see LGBTQ and out president in our lifetimes? And how do you think that fight is going?
It's interesting. I don't think, we don't want to compare suffering. We want to eliminate suffering. So it's not a good thing to make those comparisons, because it makes it seem competitive, and it's not competitive. In some sense, because some men with financial advantages are gay or trans, or it may be more of an advance. But I don't know. I don't think there should be a competition of tiers. I think we have to support each other.
Well, I want to say thank you, and I'm not sure if you can see the chat, but I mean, there are dozens and dozens of thank yous, and oh my goodness, and people telling you how inspiring and how inspired they are right now, how timely and relevant this meeting has been. But I do want to ask just one last question. Could you please leave us with one word? I took this from a friend of mine. Could you please leave us with one word describing how you feel after having this conversation and enlightening us?
Oh, hopeful. Because, looking at you makes me hopeful. and the nature of the questions, which have to do with a will to move forward, I would say. The question is just how.
Right.
Or the uncertainty is just how. But the will and the energy to move is definitely there. So I'm in lockdown too, like everybody else. I'm here in a very nice farmhouse, so I'm not complaining. but I'm very glad to have seen all of you and to have heard questions, to have had this kind of communal experience. And this is what movements are based of. And they're fun. I just want to say they make everything else boring.
Oh, yeah. I can assure you I'd much rather be, in the streets covering a protest till 4 a.m. than doing any other work I could possibly be doing. So I think.
And I would love to read. Where can I read the reports that you write?
Actually, I can get you those. I actually produce a 6 p.m. news at FOX19 every day. But tomorrow at 6 p.m., my documentary airs. It's called Bigger Than a Moment, documenting the outcry of our city. I have been working on this. I mean, on the night of that Friday night, May 29th, was when everything really erupted here in Cincinnati. And I didn't get home early that morning until about 4 a.m. And I remember I was laying in bed and I couldn't go to sleep. And I just started writing. And I wrote and I wrote and I pitched ideas to people, and they, told me they were awful. But, I had pushed back against the system. And months later, I've got an hour documentary airing tomorrow. So I'll definitely be able to get that to you.
Okay, yeah. Can you help me? Can I? Because I want to see it.
Okay, we can exchange information. I'll get it to you because I want you to see it.
Wonderful. Oh, that's so great.
I want you to see it.
All right. This has been terrific, and I'm so glad it's going to continue with your documentary. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. And for those asking, yes, it's on Channel 19 tomorrow at 6 p.m. Bigger Than a Moment. Can't wait. It's gonna.
Okay.
The weight will be lifted.
It's an Ohioan, even though I'm from Toledo, not Cincinnati. I'm very proud to have been with you and to see the courage and the change and the humor and the
Oh,
Will.
well, thank you. I'm honored. I'm honored to be having this, to be sharing this space. I'm honored, and thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I was going to say, I just wanted to say, again, on behalf of the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, I want to thank you, Gloria, for taking time out of your very busy schedule to have this conversation with us tonight. I think it was very meaningful and impactful. And Malcolm, again, thank you for moderating this for us tonight. As we mentioned at the beginning of this recording, we will be recording this and posting this later for everybody to watch. Thank you to everybody that has attended. As we mentioned earlier, you can check freedomcenter.org on our online learning resources and some upcoming programs. And again, please consider donating to our COVID-19 relief fund so we can continue having engaging programs like this. But again, thank you to everybody and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.